Now to our top story. The iconic Russian writer Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn has died at the age of 89. The Nobel Prize winner and dissident passed away in Moscow after a stroke. He will be buried in Moscow on Wednesday. Claire Sebastian looks back at his life.
A man who created classic art out of an intransigent loyalty to truth. Through his writings, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn became the moral conscience of a nation, one of the first voices brave enough to expose the horrors of the Soviet regime. He leaves a powerful historical legacy.
I now hope that the historical materials and evidence of those cruel and troubled years collected by me and presented to the public will be remembered.
His struggle began early. After a distinguished military career in World War II, he was arrested in 1945 for anti-Soviet activities and sentenced to 8 years hard labor. It was in the camps he began to write. His first novel, A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, was published in 1962 during Khrushchev's post-Stalin political thaw. The book brought him international fame and earned him the 1970 Nobel Prize for Literature.
He represents the power of one man who, with his talent and his courageous background, he could resist and he could finally win. He is a big winner. Solzhenitsyn, he is not a loser.
But within a decade, Khrushchev was ousted and Solzhenitsyn's fortunes went into sharp decline. KGB harassment and censorship pushed him to publish his work secretly abroad. In 1974, he was arrested, charged with treason, and stripped of his Russian citizenship. But he continued fighting. From a small town in Vermont, he railed against the communist regimes of the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and vocally attacked what he called the moral corruption of the West. And on his return to Russia in 1994, he was openly scathing of Boris Yeltsin's brand of democracy, though he showed clear approval of his successor, Vladimir Putin.
Solzhenitsyn's legacy is that a great talented personality can stand up both to the most tyrannical regime and to the mainstream of the world kind of thought.
A man who left no one indifferent, Solzhenitsyn's political message was hailed and criticized in equal proportion. And accounts of his life were often clouded by subjectivity.
I said to him, Aleksandr Isayevich, this is just awful. Look what they are doing with your life. And he answered me bitterly, saying, yes, they lie about me as if I was dead, but I'm used to it.
Alongside his polemic against the Soviet regime, he pushed for a de-urbanized, newly religious Russia. He hoped his works would save Russia from further moral breakdown, but some still question his success.
The Cold War is over, and Russia has changed, and in a lot of ways that may be sort of Solzhenitsyn's political tragedy, that his own hopes of playing a role in reshaping Russia after the Soviet Union never came to fruition at all.
He was a family man, survived by his 3 sons and his wife Natalia.
Receiving so many different comments from people, it was touching and sad, and then at the same time, it was also very warm to read from a lot of people words of what a difference his works made in their personal life. And this comes from Western people, French people, American people, Russian people.
We were always a fighters' team. I've always supported him in his most difficult decisions. We've always approached life rationally together and believe that the best defense is to attack.
From KGB supervision to international acclaim, Solzhenitsyn spent his life in the spotlight, but he died quietly at home. Behind these walls, in a brick house on the banks of the Moscow River, a life of constant struggle finally came to an end. Tributes have been flooding in from Russia and around the world as people remember a controversial figure, a man of undisputed literary genius, and most of all, a moral point of reference, who worked up to his final moments to preserve the dignity of his beloved Russia. Claire Sebastian, RT, Moscow.
Writer Peter Hallenstein became friends with Solzhenitsyn in Switzerland during the 1970s. He told RT about the former dissident's first years in exile and also about his attitude towards the new Russia where he returned in the 90s.
Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn came to Switzerland in the year 1974 together with his family, and he stayed here for almost 2 years. And from the beginning of his stay in Zurich, he was supervised by the KGB, and he was very afraid, and his wife too, that their children could be kidnapped, and that was the reason that he left Switzerland for America. It was his goal to come back to Russia without any doubt, yes. He wasn't happy in the United States. Well, first and foremost, he was a great person, a great writer, and when I saw him last time in his house in Moscow, of course we talked about his impressions of Russia today. And I must tell you frankly, I had the impression he was not very happy with everything. The whole development of Russia, you know, and the money who came in, the business which is dominating Moscow today, and some of the human aspects. He missed many of the human aspects today. That made it very heavy for him.
Meanwhile, Viktor Linnik, who's the editor-in-chief of the weekly Slovo newspaper here in Moscow, says Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's primary concern was the well-being of Russian people.
I think his care of all his life was primary care. What he cared most and foremost about was the Russian people. And from that point of view, anyone who he considered to be enemies of the Russian people, that is, first the communists, that's why he was so critical of the Soviet regime. Then when he came to live in the West, he realized that the West is also not very friendly, to put it mildly, toward Russia, the Russian people. And when he got back from his exile to Russia, he saw that the authorities of the Yeltsin regime were not all that friendly again, were not good on the Russian people. And all those forces he's always considered to be his enemies because his primary concern was the well-being of the Russian